Okay. Good morning, everyone. This is Cherry Kubota at the Ohio State University. Welcome to the first Indoor Ag Science Cafe. And if I'm correct, this is the 80th Indoor Ag Science Cafe. So nice. It's been long time, but I'm so glad we are still active and we're doing hard work and then providing good information to you. So this started as a project of OptimIA, optimizing indoor agriculture for leafy green production, and then co-sponsored by two additional research groups. The first one is Advanced CEA, and the other one is CEA HERB. So, welcome to Indoor Ag Science Cafe, the first one of 2026. Um, like to show what kind of presentations we provide. So either research-oriented academic presentations or industry-oriented technology sharing, technology-based or issues presentations. Your suggestions are welcome. Your nomination yourself is welcome. Could be group presentations, could be solo presentation. We usually do this once a month, Tuesday, of the whatever the selected Tuesday, starting at 11 a.m. That's our usual time frame. So let us know if you are interested. Topic or presenters. So the previous ones, again, we've done the 20, no, sorry, we've done the 79 times in the past. This is the 80s. And then you can find previous ones now with the three websites. The first one is traditional or historical OptimIA website. And then the second one is Advanced CEA website, and then now CEA website. So each one has an archive page, so you can actually look for previous speakers' talks. I don't think we deleted anything yet. The other presentation speakers do not want to share after the live session. So in that case, we don't record. So that means there might be missing numbers so because of that. So just wanted to let you know what we have. So today we're gonna have Dr. Melanie Yelton from Growbig Consultants, and then UGGA, which is the United Greenhouse Growers Association. She's the founder of that association, and she's gonna talk about that function and then vision. So that would be nice because we never had this, neutral association to support growers in CEA in North America or specifically US. And then next month, we're going to have Ian Justice, who will be talking about raspberry and blackberry production techniques and then some key information to be successful for that. And then I'm completely open beyond March, so I welcome again your suggestion for that. So today's leading presentation is Dr. Melanie Yelton, long-term friend of many of us working in CEA. And then she's with her colleague, Sam Cronert, also from the same association. And she's going to talk about the presentation title is Building the Future Together, the United Greenhouse Growers Association. So I'm going to stop my sharing and have Melanie to share her slides to present.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be here, Cherry. It's really lovely. This is the first time I've spoken with the Ag Cafe, so it's really an honor to be here. It's particularly an honor to be speaking the day after Martin Luther King Day. So it says building the future. I was tempted to make it dreaming the future together as a homage to Martin Luther King, but I really want to use our time together today to really dream about what the future should look like for CEA. And in some respects, this is about how the Ag Cafe has served us from the standpoint of going from being a very specific, where we learn very much about the details of how to grow effectively, to maybe this lecture is a little bit more pontificating on what we should be doing as a group and as an industry. So I'm going to begin the talk by just telling you a little bit more about myself. Like Cherry said, I've known many of you for years and years and years, so you know all about me. But just really quickly, I made this three colors because my life professionally falls into three little sections. And I think it's important because it's informed how I look at the world. I did basic research for the first, half of my career or so, teaching, doing research, working as director of sequencing at the Human Genome Project, and getting my PhD in plant biology at UC Davis. So it's very farmer agnostic, if you will. I rarely interacted with farmers, and I kept my nose to the grindstone or to the bench, if you will, thinking about very basic research. And then I left Stanford University to get into more applied work. And that was when I got to work with farmers, which I found truly thrilling and meaningful. And I worked at Lumigro, an LED lighting company, and then worked at a large vertical farming company many of you may have heard of, Plenty Unlimited. So again, this was where I stepped away from basic research, which translates into, very long-term work that doesn't have any short-term applicable justification. And then I went into consulting after I left Plenty. And that's been a whole new perspective for me that's led me to this talk today, because this is when I started to work with many different growers of different sizes. I would say small to super small, 2 or 3 to 4 acres farmers, to very small, half-acre farmers. And I started to understand the lack of communication they have among each other, and the problems that they face. So anyway, so that's kind of given perspective of what I'm doing now. Okay, so today's talk is I'm going to talk about the problem that we have with our food system and how we've made some mistakes and the need for a national model. That's currently my obsession, if you will. The barriers that we have to overcome, and why growers really, I feel like, need to lead, certainly play a major role in this change. And then the creation of the United Greenhouse Growers Association, which we hope will be a big step in the right direction. And then what actions that you can actually take. Okay, so right now it's just like this is the way things look right now. The US vegetable production is really, really highly concentrated. 75% of our vegetables are grown in California, which is lucky for me because I live in California. 90% of our leafy greens are grown in Arizona and California. So this dependency makes nationally us very, very vulnerable. It makes us vulnerable to drought, water. Many of you hear about the droughts that we face here in California. It's a big problem. And, many of our farmers have had to switch crops. Sam was just telling me yesterday about driving up from the Central Valley, seeing that many of our farmers who used to grow fruit trees are switching to agave as a crop. Extreme weather, we're all facing this. Disease outbreaks, we've seen disease sweep through our tomato production and in many cases, strawberry production. Labor shortages. I mean, that's a whole world that we could talk about. In fact, I feel like this lecture today that I'm talking to you for an hour about, really should be a course. But the bottom line is our production is geographically concentrated, which makes it very risky nationally. Okay, so we really, as a result, depend heavily on imports. 59% of our fresh fruit is imported, and 35% of our vegetables are imported. Generally speaking, in the winter months, that means Mexico and Canada. You can see that little graph there I have of where we import our food from. So, again, this makes us vulnerable. There can be border delays and policy changes that we've seen recently, other international weather events, logistics bottlenecks, and then, there's just cost volatility, excuse me. The bottom line is trade dependency increases the fragility of our fresh fruit and vegetable supply. Okay. In addition, our produce travels all over the world, literally. It goes from the farm to the packing house to cold storage to a broker to a regional distributor. Our retail distribution center, finally the store, and I didn't even add here that, finally it shows up at your house. But at every single step, there's the opportunity for more damage, There's breaks in temperature. There are delays in this movement, frequently a loss of traceability. And it's all dependent on labor to be able to handle this effectively and be able to know what to do. So the bottom line is fresh food moves through too many hands before a consumer ever even actually sees it. Uh-oh, what happened? Is that okay? All right, sorry there. Okay, so this means that our fresh produce loses value on the shelf life before it even reaches us. They're highly perishable. These long transit and storage activities that happen before it shows up on our shelves often are 7 to 10 days in transit, and it can use up 50% of its shelf life before it finds its way to the consumer. So every single day in transit, there's quality loss, there's the risk of spoilage, and there's shrinkage. Bottom line is time equals loss, and our system is slow and dangerous. I didn't really put things about food safety here, but that's a whole nother thing that this long transit time gives support to is just gaps in food safety. So while there's a lot of fresh food in many respects, so much of it is lost, and we still have so many communities that lack access to fresh food. So I just have a little map there of food deserts in the United States. 40%, that's just an incredibly large number of fresh food produce is wasted at the retail and consumer levels, even after it's delivered. Um, so fresh fruits are the most perishable and the hardest to deliver, which has really driven the whole processed food industry. 54 Americans, this is a startling number, live in food deserts. And you can see where these food deserts typically are from that map. High waste and low access coexist because the supply chain is long and centralized. Okay, so the system overproduces in some regions and underproduces everywhere else. So it's really a, what is it, a bang or bust situation. So if you look at the website that I have there on the right, the top states by percentage of population that are in food deserts, that's an interesting article because it also gives a lot of information about cities and it looks at these metrics in many different ways. Okay, so this is the other thing that we don't like to talk about. Well, we don't like to talk about a lot of things, but it depends on a very vulnerable workforce. Our labor is the single largest operational risk for fresh produce. This is, again, another staggering number. 73% of the United States agriculture workers are foreign born. 40% of the farm workers are unauthorized, and only 17% work under the H-2A visa program. With specialty crops, they require even more labor, the hand picking of strawberries, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers. They're even more vulnerable to this workforce. So it directly impacts the harvest per acreages and the increased losses. And I'll just tell you a couple little stories. I know here in California, there's actually crops that are going unharvested this year. These are outdoor crops, particularly grapes, because of labor problems. And that's just crazy. I've got pictures I wanted to put in here, but I didn't. Fields and fields just rotting on the vine. And then also, most of you understand if you work in production greenhouses, the training that it takes. So a person that's managing and picking their strawberries or tomatoes, there's a steep learning curve to be able to do that effectively. So there's a loss there. So labor is a big problem that we need to address. Okay, so now I want to kind of turn to thinking about a little bit of the different thing. I kind of told you why our food supply is so fragile, but what I want to talk about now is how is the federal government really looking at this? And this is something that I keep looking more and more into, and it surprises me at every turn. Um, the way the USDA looks at food security is they look at household access to food and whether or not they're getting sufficient calories, whether or not they have the money to buy that food, the ability to obtain shelf-stable food. So this means, dried or processed foods. It doesn't really consider availability of fresh vegetables. whether or not everyone regionally is getting a steady supply of fresh vegetables or has year-round access to perishable foods. So this bothers me because, again, it primarily looks at the SNAP program that exists, but SNAP kind of assumes, well, it doesn't kind of, it actually does assume that food exists, that it's being made, that it's being grown. It doesn't really look at where that food comes from and what is really the quality of that food. So again, the bottom line is a household can be considered food secure, but it really doesn't have any reliable access to fresh produce. And surprisingly, again, this is kind of shocking to me. There's no national strategy for secure fresh vegetable supplies. There's really no strategy for food security, not just for vegetables, for just about anything. We just have been so blessed in the United States. We go to the grocery store and there's food, and we just assume that's the way it is. I don't know if any of you experienced during COVID when I went to the grocery store and there was actually zero on the shelves for a few days till we all calmed down. But that was a startling thing to see. Yeah, so there's no national vegetable supply model. There's no regional resistance planning. There's no targets for agriculture expansion. There's no framework for integrating field imports and CEA in a balanced way that's economically sustainable. There's no policies identifying where greenhouse production is most critical, where it should be. The federal programs do try to address nutrition, sort of, kind of, and hunger, again, sort of, kind of, based on calories. And there are subsidies through the SNAP programs, but not for fresh food. So fresh vegetables supplies unmanaged at a national level. All right, I just want to take one slide. We've talked about this, I feel like, ad nauseum, but we have had a lot of venture capital that tried to get involved with fresh vegetable production. They tried to solve the food security problem, but it really was never designed to solve that problem. There was approximately $7 billion invested in CEA over those years, 2016 to 2022. And this is a staggering number. I can't even think numbers that big. And again, this is probably part of what really drove me to start to think about these things and how upset I was where this money, much of it is gone. It's just gone. It's, hopefully people who worked at various companies learned a lot and they're taking that forward. But I had another slide, another talk that I gave. I said, well, what if the $1 billion that went into the company that I was working at, Plenty, was divided into smaller batches of, $3 million. And we had $3 million greenhouses, in many communities, in 300 communities all over the United States. Where would we be from a food security standpoint? So did we spend that $1 billion in the wrong place? So investors frame CEA as a technology disruption. They expected super hyper growth and startup style returns. The facilities were frequently large, centralized facilities, far from consumers, often in the wrong place. Again, Plenty, we built facilities in California and grew lettuce, which, seems a little bit counterintuitive now that we reflect on it. Why were we growing lettuce in California where we don't really need to grow lettuce in California? It's just what were we thinking? And we ignored a lot of things. There was the high operating costs and energy dependency, the long return on investment timelines. I remember sitting down probably 2 weeks after I got to Plenty with the vice president of operations and going over the math that would be associated with paying back the investors at Plenty at selling lettuce boxes at $5 a piece. And, the reality was it was impossible. And we knew it then, it was impossible. So again, what were we thinking? The biological risk inherent in some of the efforts, and then the requirement for skilled labor. This really slapped us in the face, if you will, in trying to grow so fast and not having access to skilled labor. So CEA was treated for a while like a software investment, software as a service, instead of a food infrastructure effort. So the real failure was that CEA didn't fail at all. It was the funding model failed it. It was not a failure of our growers or our technology or consumer demand, but it was just that venture capital had applied. The failure was venture capital was applied to long-term agriculture infrastructure, which was just wrong. And there was a pressure for rapid scaling instead of regional stability. That was the objective. Centralized facilities instead of distributed production. And again, this goes back to my obsession with the model. There's no federal roadmap guiding where CEA can truly strengthen supply. So things popped up maybe where they shouldn't have been, maybe where they couldn't get labor. So again, it was just a misguided effort in many respects because there was no model to give us a framework to build on. So the bottom line here is food security requires patient infrastructure alignment, investment, and not startup economics. So, okay, so this gets me to my national model obsession. I really feel that this is something we need. We need a national model for food security. I think it should be, I mean, obviously my bias is fresh vegetable supplies, but it really could be for all food security. It would include elements like regional vegetable demand versus the supply. It would adjust for climate and water vulnerability by region, the import dependency, how much we want there, the transportation distance and risk associated with that, and the labor necessary for specialty crops. Um, and this is where a controlled environment agriculture really adds resilience, is having fresh vegetable supply nationwide without modeling, without creating a plan. And again, this is where, like I said, I've already said I'm kind of obsessed about this. I would love to see more graduate students who, are capable and interested in doing modeling, picking this up as projects. The risks stay invisible. We don't really know what they are. The investments stay misdirected, like what we've seen before, and fresh food remains unsecure. People just don't have it, particularly if there's a crisis. Um, and so I just feel like we can't really plan for things that we haven't modeled and we don't have scaffolding for. Okay, so why we really need this, I feel like I'm, preaching to the choir a little bit, but that's okay. Controlled environment agriculture really fills a gap because it provides this year-round regional production. It's climate independent, or at least we can figure that out. It shortens those supply chains and gives predictable yields so that grocery stores and people can plan. It reduces the spoilage and shrink associated with transportation, and it can be local. And it really fills in those critical gaps where field production is seasonal or vulnerable. So people in Nebraska and South Dakota and other places can get fresh food all the time. It fills in the gaps where transportation is really critical when it's over, 400 or 500, reaching thousands of miles, and where our import dependency is greatest. So the bottom line is that CEA stabilizes the fresh food system. It doesn't replace field agriculture in any way. It really protects it and supports it. It keeps people aware and interested in eating fresh food. Okay. So this is the way I sort of see this model panning out. That there will be hundreds of regional greenhouses, and there'll be thousands of smaller community growers and greenhouses. It'll be spread across states and climate zones, and again, local production. And I added this too. I feel like the federal government could provide us, if we have this model, that there could be hand in glove to this, incentives to follow this model. You can imagine if there's a structure, a plan, and someone said, I want to build a greenhouse as a part of the plan that's consistent with the plan, then maybe they would get a tax benefit. Maybe they would get an interest-free loan. There would be incentives to follow the plan. So maybe if this had been the case, then, Plenty would not have built their facilities in California. Maybe they would have built them in, North Dakota or Wyoming. They would have built somewhere else that would be consistent with the plan. So I think that, again, a lot of interesting questions and solutions will come out of a national model. And there's precedent for this. I throw up the pictures right there up in the right-hand corner of the interstate highway. So this was a plan. This was a plan the government had, which we all enjoy. But it came about when Eisenhower was president and said, hey, we need good highways where you can drive across our country. Prior to that, you'd show have very significant differences from state to state. This is true still for the state roads. I can remember growing up in North Carolina when you crossed into Virginia or South Carolina, there's a line and the road changed certainly in quality, but not the interstate highways because we had this guarantee from the federal government. And also, I was a part of the Human Genome Project for quite a while. And that was an interesting project because it was funded by the federal government, about $1.5 billion to sequence the first human genome. And at that time, we had no clue how we could possibly do that in a million years. But we were charged with trying to figure it out and create effective ways to do that. And so this investment that the government made for both these projects really lent a stability and a framework to get so much more done. Certainly, the Genome Project has given rise to any myriad of companies and treatments that were not possible and would not have been possible had the federal government not stepped forward and said, let's spend $1 billion to do this. Okay, so why this all matters is it buffers against climate shocks and reduces long-term transport, increases supply redundancy, and strengthens local food access. And it builds this regional workforce pipeline. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Okay, let's see. So coming back to that, I think that the CEA expansion is limited by the shrinking of skilled workforce. We've already talked a little bit about this, about how labor accounts for 45 to 50% of the greenhouse operating costs, and skilled growers are retiring faster than they can be replaced. Many of the new hires are engineering people or technicians that really don't have horticulture training, frequently because they didn't have access to it. They didn't know where to go to get horticulture training. They wanted it, but didn't know what to do. So the crop performance and productivity suffered without plant knowledge. We have to always remember that while automation is super duper cool, it still requires trained growers to manage the biology and the systems. Bottom line is that the limiting factor for CEA really growing effectively is the people, not the technology. Okay, but that's really changing. Many educators have really stepped up to create very effective programs. So the next generation of growers are coming out of the woodwork, which is wonderful. But we need to continue to show that jobs can be available locally. And this is part of the whole pattern that I'd like for people to see, is that if we educate people and there's not jobs for them locally, people are still not going to be interested in going into horticulture. This is another benefit that I really should have highlighted more about the good that can come from having more local greenhouse production. Because typically people don't want to move so far from their homes and families. They want to stay within, 200 or 300 miles of their families. And so we might get someone trained very effectively, but if there's no job, then and I've heard many educators tell me this, I've had my best horticulture students, they go into medicine because they still see that as a reliable fallback career where they can stay close to home and family. It's just not realistic for us to train people and then they go, thousands of miles away to work. People don't want that in their lives. So I think we've really ignored not just the educating about the skills, but educating about the future, the life that they can create with a career in horticulture. So anyway, looking at these bullet points here, we show that horticulture is actually high tech and sustainably driven. Those are two words that high school students want to see in their futures: technology and sustainability. They also want to see entrepreneurship. Those are the three words that they want to see in their futures. These are FFA students. So early exposure to CEA inspires an interest in plant science and food systems. Teachers and schools can become this powerful entry point into the industry. So anyway, the bottom line, I'm skip to that. Education is the foundation for this future. and the CEA workforce. Workforce development tools industry, and the industry must connect them. And I just put some of the schools that are doing a great job here. That's Charlie Schultz there at New Mexico Community College, who runs a nice program there. Niagara College is a community college up in Canada that does an amazing. I want to highlight some of the programs that I've watched grow that are very, very effective here. Cherry's programs, Cherry and Mark lead a team at Ohio State, and this is very exciting that they created the first that I'm aware of academic production scale greenhouse where growers could really come and see how things that they were talking about would really perform in a production size greenhouse. Paul Fisher and his team created an affordable greenhouse and environmental horticulture training program that was offered in both Spanish and English at affordable prices. And that course has now been expanded to include business classes. Neil Masson, AJ Both, Mark Van Ursel, and others created Glaze, which was a natural coalition connecting growers. And there's many, as I've already mentioned, community colleges that are expanding: CEA, Cabrillo College, Santa Fe Community College, University of Wyoming, Colorado State, Michigan State, and others are creating amazing programs. And then finally, I mentioned a few organizations that have been key. The Resource Innovation Institute with Derek Smith and Rob Eddy, Hort Americas with Chris Higgins, and then significant publications like GPN News and Greenhouse Growers. All right, so what are the barriers that we have to overcome? I think some of them is federal, I've already talked about federal agencies really don't see CEA. They don't see CEA at all, really. They don't see it as a big major player in food infrastructure. So it's really not included in resilient planning, what little there is. Students are often lacking in business training. So we've done a pretty good job of teaching kids about plant science, but we're not teaching them how to translate that into a business. Sam and I have been mentoring and working with a young grower who really wants to start a business, is a very gifted horticulturalist, but doesn't know how to make that jump into starting his own business. So he can see it, but he doesn't know how to get there, which is really frustrating. There's no real startup capital. Similarly, for the growers that we've worked with, and I've worked with other growers in my consultancy, is how do they get money? Even if they're not first generation, but maybe they're a grower that's got started, so they're not exactly just started out the gate, but they'd like to grow. They don't really see how to move forward. The high capital prevents not only entry, but expansion. So anyway, the other thing I want to highlight too is we have a very fragmented industry structure. Growers are very isolated by state and by crop. So we need to have a national coordination for knowledge, data, and advocacy. Okay, let's see. I can't see all my slide down at the bottom. Anyway, so I'll just let you read it. Okay, so why growers must lead? Well, they're doing the work, and there's over 9,000, which is kind of a staggering number, because I think if we were to name how many growers and how many CEA facilities, most of us couldn't name more than, maybe 10, 20, maybe people like Eric Runkle could name a couple hundred, but most of us we don't know who they are. We don't know who the growers are out there, but statistically, there should be about 9,000 out there. And if you include more of the floriculture people, even more, up to about 11,000. But again, they're isolated by crop type and boundaries and how they're doing business. There's no unified structure to share the information, the data, to rely on standards, and to coordinate this regional supply. Who is representing these growers nationally? What senators are representing CEA? And so compared to other ag sectors, greenhouses really have no national, they don't have anything like a corn lobby. There's no coordinated voice like in the Farm Bill to advocate for CEA growers. I think it's an interesting number to think about. There I have there on the right, there's $3.2 billion in 2024 for corn subsidies. Not quite as much, but certainly over $1 billion, almost what was it, $1.5 billion for soybean subsidies. I'm not saying these are really bad numbers, but I think that we need to look at these numbers carefully. Is this really how our ag money should be spent? And I feel like, again, I personally don't really know any senators or legislators who are expressing my opinions and know enough about CEA, and we need to change that. Okay, what are the lessons that we can learn from other countries? Well, countries like Canada, they do have national greenhouse grower associations that are typically separated by commodity, like the Ontario Greenhouse Vegetable Growers Association, which is a organization that's been around for about 30 or 40 years. And this organization really inspired Sam and I to look towards making one for the United States. And these organizations can influence marketing and advocacy, shared research, and production standards. They have strong recognition of the protected agriculture industry. Places like Canada have things like the berry challenge, where there was like a private industry that a challenge to grow berries more effectively and independently. The Netherlands, I mean, we all look to the Netherlands as the gold standard of greenhouse production, but they do have the benefit of having highly integrated national greenhouse sector. They have centralized grower cooperatives, unified technology adoption, and national planning aligned with food supply and exports. Um, I mean, many of you have, reviewed the story about the result of World War II, where so many people, upwards of 25,000, more than 25,000 people starved to death in the Netherlands after enduring World War II. And the Netherlands said, never again. And to their credit, they have done an excellent job figuring this out, and they are now an exporter of food. So, what the United States needs to learn from these examples is to have a national grower coordination, a unified policy voice, and shared standards and data, and clear linkage between this greenhouse production and this national food strategy I keep harping on. So, the bottom line is countries with organized greenhouse networks are more resilient and competitive. Okay, so to all that end of that whole big story that I just told you about why we need this and what we should do, Sam and I put our brains together. We spent a little bit of time talking with Cherry and others earlier this summer and created a United Greenhouse Growers Association. And so that's a screenshot of the website and the website there. And what we're hoping this will do, although it's still, a nascent organization getting started, is we hope it will share, production knowledge, establish standards, improve communication, and strengthen this workforce, and align growers and researchers, and provide a unified voice, and then support the data layer that's required for national vegetable supply modeling. So again, a connected grower network is essential for scaling distributed CEA for food security. So this model not only has been done in the countries that I've told you about, we were really inspired when we heard Jinlu Yang speak at NCRA 101 this year. She has done an amazing job mapping and connecting the growers around Kentucky, the CEA growers around Kentucky. And these growers are divided up in an interactive map that you can go to by type and crop focus and where they are geographically. She's even added what sort of market they're taking their product to, whether it's a farm stand or grocery store. And it demonstrates that growers are willing to engage when they're given a structure. They know where to go to participate, to be a part of an organization. So this created a model for regional coordination and data collection and communication around growers. And identifying the workforce and supply gaps. I'd say the only downside is I just wish this was nationally. This was not just a map of Kentucky, but it was a map of the whole United States. So we're hoping what worked at a state level can happen at a national level. If you look at, we have I want to say I don't even I want to use the word similar map in California, but it's not even similar. It's just a very poor map that there's been some efforts to try to create this for California, but it's by no means as robust as what they have in Kentucky and needs a lot of work. So, so there you go. The highest producing vegetable state really doesn't even have a map of where the vegetables are being grown and how they're distributed. Okay, so let's see. I'm not going to go over these again because many of these examples of why I've already mentioned before. But what we really want the UGGA to do is to turn isolated growers into a connected national system. Okay. All right. So I'm getting down to about the last couple of slides. And I want to go, you're like, okay, Melanie's been waving her hands and pontificating and saying stuff and, kind of mostly stuff we kind of already know. But what can we really do? Um, I think what you can do, and I've asked myself this question, and I don't do as much as I should, but I try to do more every day, is support your local greenhouses and CE training programs and partner with schools and community colleges. And what does that mean? I'm guessing for most of you, um, you have a high school somewhere in your neighborhood, and potentially that high school has an FFA program. Call your FFA teacher, talk to them, say, would you like for me to come speak to your class? Do you need a judge for FFA? Um, do you have a student that I can mentor? And I bet you $1 they're going to say yes, because these teachers that I've talked to, and again, I've spent a lot of time, I've actually gone to the California Ag Teacher Convention, if you will, a couple years in a row. Sam went with me this year. And they were very like, hey, can you give a seminar on this? Can you talk about this? They're very hungry. We had dinner with one teacher who's like, he said, like, I'm an animal teacher. He said, I don't really know much about plants. And so we're asking teachers to educate in areas that they may not have a background in. So they will welcome your help and they need it. So again, pick up the phone, go to your school, whether it's your community college or your high school, and say, I'm going to volunteer 2 hours a month or something like that. Just say that to yourself. Call, write, advocate, and meet. This is the one I need to work hard on. As I mentioned before, like I don't even know. I've never met or called or written to my federal legislators, and I think we need to do more of this because I don't know about you, but I get a text every other minute, it feels like, for someone asking for money, and they're asking for money based on um, I'm a good person. And, that's a really great thing. You're a good person. I'm really glad you're running for Congress. But what is your platform? What are you capable of doing? What are you capable of advocating? And I think, again, we are electing people. Many of them are great people, but they don't have that knowledge base to be able to create the policies that we need. So we've got to figure out how to work with them and educate and support them and see what's important. Okay, and this is my favorite one, the last one, participate. This is in bold, join and shape the UGGA. We need more people to join. I think Cherry Kubota was one of the first people to join, so thank you, Cherry, for that. Um, and we need more people to join. John Ertl has joined, and we've been meeting periodically as a group and just sort of talking about how we can get more people involved and create what it could be. I've listed all these, lofty goals about what it could be, but it's not going to happen unless people join and participate. I might just add too that this is a nonprofit. Um, we don't really have a strong understanding of revenue. I keep telling Sam it's like a little bit like, like a bowling club or a church or something. Does it have to have a very concrete way of making money? I don't know. Maybe it does. But regardless, I think that we've got to get more people involved so we can shape this in the way it should go. Um, Again, there's organizations about sharing data and best practices. There's two that I list there that are they're strong, but they need to be stronger. So let's see. My last two things are mentor new and community scale growers. If you have growers in your community, like, the grower that, like I mentioned before, that Sam and I are working with that would like to stay in their own community, they would like to grow in their own community. Um, but they don't know how. So I ask, for you to do that. And then help build regional greenhouse networks that can serve our communities. And the bottom line is that we are all guardians of our national food security. Technology matters, but people run the farms. And if we don't step up and start doing things, we're going to see a repeat of that $7 billion that was misguided and misspent. Okay, so this is my last slide. Thank you very much for listening. And I believe strongly that greenhouses are need to be a part of every single community. They should be like our policemen, our firemen, our libraries, but particularly like our hospital. I always say, like if you break your arm, you go to the community hospital. If you need a heart transplant, well, maybe you go to, some big center, like, I'd probably go to Stanford. But I think our greenhouses should be thought of like that. That yeah, you get your, fresh produce, generally speaking, from your local greenhouse. And yeah, a lot of other stuff comes from the big producers. That's the Stanford Hospital analogy. But your community hospital does a lot for you, and your community greenhouse should do a lot for you too. And I believe that every region deserves year-round fresh access to fresh food. More decentralized greenhouse, local food production, and united growers are the guardians of our fresh food security. So thank you very much. And I'll take any questions or discussions. And hopefully I've made you sort of think for a minute.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate Melanie. A lot of information, thoughts, and vision. I thank you.